Well, I've just stood in for Dr. Shaina Dawood, and I hope I can do justice to the subject. As we know that the TNBC is defined by its absence of expressions constituting 15 to 20% of breast cancer patients in the West, but the higher prevalence in India. The metastatic TNBC is a heterogeneous disease with an aggressive course and a median survival of just 13 months, a subtype which has very limited therapeutic options. However, the genomic sequencing shows a distinct mutational portrait and various molecular subtypes with unique signaling pathways. And this has led to the expansion of the therapeutic landscape with the advent of immunotherapy, the PARP inhibitors, and the antibody drug conjugates. So if we just glance into the past era, and which also happens to be the present for a lot of patients around the globe, chemotherapeutic options have so many, on the menu. But we know that there has been a lot of studies looking at sequential versus combination, but sequential is preferred and combination is reserved for a rapid response. And treatment is usually given till disease progression, best response, or toxicity. And it's always been one size fits all, just chemotherapy in all lines. And of course, not to forget metronomic therapy, which also in the TNBC cohort of the Victor 6 trial showed a median PFS of 6 months and a median overall survival of 12 months. However, this was a retrospective study. There was an attempt made to actually personalize therapy with the TNT study, looking at which patients should receive carboplatin. Of course, all these were all comers, but there was a pre-specified subgroup analysis of the BRCA positive patients. And here it clearly showed that they benefited from carboplatin versus docetaxel with almost a doubling of the overall response rate. But if you look at the other patients, even those with BRCA-ness, they did not benefit the same way from carboplatin, and the responses were equivalent to docetaxel. So this is an important study indicating where one would think of carboplatin in the metastatic setting. Of course, we can't go away without looking at bevacizumab. This was the meta-analysis, and it showed that there was a progression-free survival advantage, but did not translate into an overall survival advantage. However, it is mentioned as one of the options to date in the NCCN guidelines. Now, coming to the changing landscape in TNBC and discovering the positives in the negative. So the change is hard at first, but messy in the middle, but gorgeous at the end. And I hope the journey that I take you through has a gorgeous end. So if you look at the impact of molecular subtypes, this pivotal DNA microanalysis showed that it represented the biology of the disease. It was mapped to some extent by the immunohistochemistry, but correlated with the survival. And then, of course, it was found that if you look at the ERPR subtypes, you can see the distribution of the clinico-pathological immunohistochemistry in the intrinsic subtypes. And if you look at the intrinsic subtype distribution in the triple negative, most of them are basal-like, but they are not synonymous. So there are some triple negatives which are not basal-like. So you cannot use them interchangeably. And of course, they have a worse prognosis as compared to the others. Of course, after that, there was a absolute flurry of subtypes and molecular subtypes based, as mentioned by Dr. Rebecca Dent, by proteomics and proteogenomics. And you have here various publications. But what is important is it shows that not only is it heterogeneous at the histopathology level, but also at the molecular level. And then, although this has largely remained in the lab and has not translated into a practical application in the clinic, the insights into the biology have shown that there are a lot of approaches which are biomarker driven in TNBC. And you can see that you have the luminal androgen receptor type, where they behave more like the luminal types or the hormone receptor positive patients. And the CDK4/6 inhibitors might be useful along with the anti-androgen therapy. You have the immune enriched, and which looks at the immune checkpoint inhibitors. Then you have the PARP inhibitors in the DNA repair deficiency. And then, of course, the PIK3 AKT mTOR activated. Won't go into details of this because some of the studies were negative. Now, what is the therapeutic potential? And this you can see over here, how the gene expression subtypes indicate which are the subtypes which are likely to be benefited by the expanded armamentarium. So why is TNBC a target for immunotherapy? Also, it's been covered to some extent by the previous speaker, but in the metastatic setting, the high mutation rates, the T cell infiltration, and the higher expression of PD-L1 actually makes it vulnerable to the immune checkpoint inhibitors. Now, this single agent studies were a little disheartening. However, there are certain lessons to be learned, that the modest overall response rate with single agents, the duration of response was longer, especially in those who had a CR, PR, or stable disease, and how we learned to enrich the population that we would look at if we did the phase 3 trials. That is, the first line would be preferred. They should be PD-L1 positive and high levels of TILs. Of course, TMB also has come out as one of the biomarkers, but not used so much in clinical practice. Now, the phase 3 studies we all know of is the first one was the Impassion 130, then the Impassion 131, and I won't dwell much on this. It's been repeated so often, the reasons for failure of the Impassion 131, where the nab-paclitaxel was replaced by paclitaxel along with the atezolizumab. Whereas if you look at the Keynote 355, this is the phase 3 study looking at pembrolizumab in combination with various chemotherapy regimes. This is because the patients were included from 6 to 12 months as well, whereas in the Impassion 130, they had to be about 12 months from their adjuvant or neoadjuvant therapy. So if you look at the regimes that were used in the 355, you have the nab-pacli, gem, carbo. So these were all the regimes that were combined with pembrolizumab. So if you look at the Impassion trial, it did meet its primary endpoint. The PFS did show a hazard ratio of 0.8, which was significant. However, you can see that in the intent to treat analysis, if you look at the overall survival, it did not meet its endpoint. And since there was a hierarchical testing, although there was a significant difference of about 7.5 months in the overall survival in the PD-L1 positive population, you can see that the hazard ratio is 0.67, but they could not actually test for significance because of the hierarchical nature of the testing. So, but it was a meaningful actual difference. And on the basis of this, it was approved for first-line treatment. However, there has been an update, at least it has been removed from the NCCN guidelines because they could not give the follow-up data to the FDA. However, it remains in the guidelines for the rest of the world. Now, atezolizumab, you can see the difference between Impassion 130, 131, and the discrepancy can be because of the control arm did better in the 131. The nab-paclitaxel could be a better drug than paclitaxel, and of course the confounding effect of the steroids. Now let us look at the Keynote 355. The important being that you look at the biomarker, and it has to be, the benefit was significantly better for the CPS score of more than or equal to 10. And you can see that it was also better for the CPS more than 1, but much better for the CPS more than 10. And if you look at the chemotherapy regime across subgroups, you can see that if you look at the PDL1 CPS more than 10, you can see that the benefit is more with NAB-PACLI and PACLI and less with GEM-CAR, but that may be because most of the patients who relapsed within the 6 to 12 months, that is earlier from their adjuvant therapy, received GEM-CAR. So if you look at the intent to treat population, also there was a significant difference. So the final overall survival results were presented recently, and you can see that it reached a significant level with 23 months versus 16.1 month, and with a hazard ratio of 0.72 with a p-value which was significant. So you can see in the final analysis that the median overall survival was PDL1 CPS more than 10. They are the ones who actually benefited and should receive this checkpoint inhibitor with any one of the lines of chemotherapy in the first line setting. And also there was a significant difference in the median PFS level. The safety concerns were consistent with the profiles of each regime. And of course, the investigators concluded that this is a new standard of care for patients with PDL1 and CPS more than 10. I did not much allude to the testing because that has also been very often discussed. What one should remember is that one should see which chemotherapy backbone is suitable for the patient given on prior treatments, and accordingly choose the diagnostic PDL1 test. So you have the 22C3D for the pembrolizumab, and you have the SP142 for, of course, the atezolizumab. So how do you integrate immunotherapy? When, which patient, and which drug? So it should be that atezolizumab as well as NAB-PACLI in patients who are more than 1% PDL1 in the immune cells by Ventana SP142, or pembrolizumab with either of the chemotherapy regimes with a PDL1 CPS more than 10. And further clinical trials are looking at non-toxin backbones and of course combination with other targeted therapies. Now let us look at the PARP inhibitors, and we are very well aware of these two phase 3 studies who looked at the importance of using the PARP inhibitors in the germline setting. And as you can see that only patients with the germline BRCA positive mutations actually benefited in the progression-free survival in both the studies. But if you look at the overall survival, so the response rate and progression-free survival almost similar in both these studies, about 3 months. The EMBRECA included brain mets patients who also benefited, but there was no overall survival benefit in either of the studies. But this could be because they were not powered to do so and because of the crossover effect. Now, this is another important phase 2 study to see whether the indications of olaparib can be extended beyond the BRCA1 and 2. And this was presented at the ASCO 2020. And in this, you can see this patients who had a somatic BRCA1-2 mutations also had a response rate of 50%. And those with germline PALB2 mutations had a response rate of 82%, extending the benefit of olaparib to these mutations. Of course, the other mutations did not benefit, and the responses were also seen after CDK4/6 inhibitors. So now we come to the antibody drug conjugates, which are really making waves in this particular subtype of breast cancer. I won't go due to shortage of time, I won't go into the mechanisms of action, but we know that the antibody, which is the TROP2 antibody, is with a linker linked to the payload, which is a part of the irinotecan, and you can see that it's a Imu-132, and you can see in the metastatic subset prior to lines of therapy in phase 1-2 studies, it showed impressive overall response rate of 33.3% with a median progression-free survival of 5.5 months and overall survival of 13 months. So very gratifying results from the phase 1 and phase 2 and leading to the ASCENT phase 3 study, where the patients were taken in more than 2 prior lines of therapy and progression of, or if they progressed within 12 months of completing their adjuvant or neoadjuvant setting, and they were randomized to either sacituzumab govitecan versus the treatment of physician's choice. And you can see that there were almost 267 patients on either arm, and the primary endpoint was the progression-free survival, and the secondary endpoints are there to see on this slide. And there were various stratification factors regarding the number of prior chemotherapies, the geographic region, as well as the presence or absence of brain metastasis. So the patients with brain metastases were included, but they were not, they were excluded for the primary endpoint estimation. So it's a triple-edged success of the ASCENT study. You can see that all the median progression-free survival, the overall survival, the response rate are significantly better with the experimental arm as compared to the chemotherapy arm. What is important, there are certain important updates, similar results in more than 65 years, and improvement in progression-free survival in TNBC with brain mets. So this has opened the floodgates for the ADC in MBC, and you can also in TNBC. So you are looking at ADCs which target the LIV1 expressing TNBCs, also those which overexpress the HER3. And then, of course, the HER2 low TNBC is very important because almost 50% or more of patients belong to this group. So if you are going to have these patients also benefit from the ADCs, and you can see that some of the preliminary results are very gratifying. So coming to the end of my talk, the roadmap for metastatic TNBC, and this is a slide which I borrowed from Dr. Hope Rugo's presentation in the ESMO 2021. And you can see that these drugs have made their way into the first line setting. As I mentioned that atezolizumab not mentioned here for the reasons I stated before. And you can see that in PD-L1 positive patients, this becomes the first line setting. Those who are PD-L1 negative and BRCA wild type, then they would go for chemotherapy. However, if they're PD-L1 negative and BRCA mutation positive, they would go for PARP inhibitors. And in the second line, you have sacituzumab govitecan, and also going to third line, you have chemotherapy, of course, reuse of checkpoint inhibitors, novel ADCs. And if you look at the NCCN guidelines, you can see on the left-hand side, nothing has changed. They are all the chemotherapy regimes. On the right-hand side, you can see that in those who are the checkpoint inhibitors and the PARP inhibitors have now come into these guidelines. So if you look at the future trials, again, a slide presented by Dr. Hope Rugo, you can see that those subtypes, the molecular subtypes that we were looking at, might actually guide the way for a personalized therapy, because we know that depending on what are the HER2 mutations or the BRCA germline mutations or the aberrations in the PIK3 pathway, we might be able to personalize therapy in the metastatic TNBC in the near future. With this, I'd like to thank you for a patient hearing.